evolution, a deliberate yet subliminal process for all but humankind. We cannot wait.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for man. He's on the move. That's cool.
Coming up, towards the end of winter 2001, a blight was to strike at the very heart of the British meat industry and ultimately the economy of the United Kingdom. Foot and mouth disease hit hard, and the heartbreaking task of trying to eradicate it weighed heavy. And this is Poundbury in the West Country of England. You could be forgiven for thinking that it looks like the quintessential English village, steeped in history and going back centuries. Certainly it has all the charm of a time gone by. But appearances can be deceptive. The discreet satellite dish tells us that we're in the 21st century and Poundbury's buildings are just as modern. We'll be looking at this architectural renaissance in Dorset and, in sharp contrast, its very close neighbour in Cornwall, the Eden Project, looking decidedly futuristic. Both sets of buildings making history in the 21st century. The 26th mission of the Space Shuttle, the first after the Challenger accident. A safe launch and a safe return was the dominant theme of the crew patch. The red vector from the NASA meatball indicates that they are still building on the strengths of NASA. The seven-starred Big Dipper symbolized their 7 friends lost on the Challenger, and the sunrise represented a new beginning. On September the 29th, 1988, Discovery was being fueled on the launch pad. The astronauts rose at 5 a.m. and after breakfast and weather briefs, they suited up. Rick Hawke, commander of the mission. Colonel Dick Cubby was the pilot. Mission specialist, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Hilmers. Dr. Pinky Nelson. And Mike Lounge. This flight was to be the culmination of efforts of tens of thousands of people across the nation. NASA engineers, contractors, many advisory groups both inside and outside government. This was to be in every sense a test flight. During the 30 months since the Challenger accident, there had been literally hundreds of hardware changes to not only the rocket booster, but also to the orbiter and the large liquid rocket fuel tank. Numerous software changes had been implemented and tested exhaustively. They had trained as a crew for 20 months. When it came time to strap into this £4.5 million of hardware, they were convinced that the team was as ready as they could be. They walked to the bus that would transport them and were cheered by colleagues and friends. It waited on the launch pad, the rocket.
Safety and quality has no constraints to launch pad.
Go for auto sequence start. Discovery's 4 redundant computers have assumed
T-minus 23 seconds and counting.
The SRB nozzle profile.
T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. Go for main engine start. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And liftoff. Americans return to space. Discovery clears the tower. According to those aboard, whether you've flown aboard the shuttle before or not, you're never really quite ready for the experience. Emotions, sight, sound, adrenaline and motion all meld together in an overwhelming bond. In the crowd, a youthful John Travolta, destined to become a huge movie star and a pilot in later years. The solid rocket motors work superbly. The long, hard work of the redesign and test team had paid off in a perfect launch. The motors burn for 2 minutes, but it takes another 6.5 minutes to achieve orbital velocity. The Discovery's liquid fuel engines provide the additional push to accelerate to a speed of 5 miles a second and an altitude of 160 nautical miles. In that orbit, they were to see 16 sunrises and sunsets a day for the next 4 days, traveling over 1 2/3 million miles.
The engine's still running 104%. 5,600 feet per second velocity, 31.8 nautical miles. Altitude, downrange distance, 38 nautical miles.
Once they were safely into orbit, they got busy with one of the primary objectives for this mission, to deploy a communication satellite for NASA. Rick and Dick in the front seats of the flight deck made checks to ascertain that the orbiter was ready to perform the separation maneuver after the deployment of the TDRS satellite. Meanwhile, Dave and Mike were busy on the aft flight deck, checking the telemetry from the spacecraft and its booster, making sure that it was healthy and ready for deployment. The 5,000-pound complex communications satellite is carried to its 22,000-mile high orbit by the inertial upper stage, which is the white portion of this 40-foot stack. Mike Lounge's job was to throw a switch to release the stack from the support structure upon getting a go from mission control. Then the order came. You are go for deploy. Here we see the TDRS-IUS combination shortly after deployment. At the moment of deployment, push-off springs give it a slow and majestic separation from the shuttle. Pinky was the chief photo documenter for the deploy. Rick in the aft flight deck maneuvered the orbiter to give additional separation from the satellite and to position the satellite into view through the overhead window to be tracked visually.
This is really a pretty satellite, really some gorgeous views out the window.
About an hour after the deploy, the first of 2 solid rocket motors fired on the upper stage. These rocket motors placed the satellite in an orbit above the equator so that it would remain fixed relative to the ground. It was to be used by NASA to increase shuttle communications with mission control and to be utilized by Landsat to relay telemetry to the ground. Many other private and government agencies were to use this sophisticated satellite. Using the middeck of the orbiter as a microgravity laboratory, the middeck was well used during the flight of Discovery. 11 experiments were carried on board from the Marshall Space Center, JSC, industry, and university laboratories all across the country. These range from biomedical investigations like protein crystal growth to material science to an engineering test of an infrared communication system. 2 experiments were very visual. One heated titanium wires, the others grew crystals of lead iodide on a membrane. Even on a short 4-day mission, the scientific data from the experiments was significant. Another mid-deck experiment performed was a phase partition experiment. Phase partitioning was used for separating up different types of biological cells. This process was found to be beneficial in developing new pharmaceuticals and also in performing biomedical research. As they flew over Hawaii, the crew expressed a desire to share some of the sights they'd been privileged to witness over the past few days. And I quote, "As we watch along with you, many emotions swell up in our hearts. Joy for America's return to space, gratitude for a nation's support through difficult times, thanksgiving for the safety of our crew, reverence for those whose sacrifice made our journey possible. Gazing outside, we can understand why mankind has looked towards the heavens with awe and wonder since the dawn of human existence. We can comprehend why our countrymen have been driven to explore the vast expanse of space, and we are convinced that this is the road to the future, the road that Americans must travel if we are to maintain the dream of our Constitution, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. As we, the crew of Discovery, witness this earthly splendor from America's spacecraft, less than 200 miles separates us from the remainder of mankind. In a fraction of a second, our words reach your ears, but lest we ever forget that these few miles represent a great goal, that to ascend through this seemingly tranquil sea will always be fraught with danger, let us remember the Challenger crew, whose voyage was so tragically short. With them, we shared a common purpose. With them, we shared a common goal. At this moment, our place in the heavens makes us feel closer to them than ever before. Those on the Challenger who had flown before and seen these sights, they would know the meaning of our thoughts. Those who had gone to view them for the first time, they would know why we set forth. They were our fellow sojourners, they were our friends. Today, where the blue sky turns to black, we can say at long last to Dick, Mike, Jeannie, to Ron and Elle, and to Krista and Greg, dear friends, we have resumed the journey that we promised to continue for you. Dear friends, your loss has meant that we could confidently begin anew. Dear friends, your spirit and your dreams are still alive in our hearts. Unquote.
Discovery,
America was back in space.
families and all of us down here, it sure does feel good to see the Challenger mission continue and America back in space.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Foot and mouth disease is one of the most infectious diseases known. Carried in the air, it can be spread mechanically by the movements of animals, people, and vehicles that have been contaminated. How far it spreads is often determined by weather and landscape. Cattle, sheep, and pigs are most likely to pick up the disease, but other exotic animals with cloven hooves in zoos and wildlife parks are also at risk. Animals lose weight, stop producing milk, and abort fetuses. They're actually infectious before any signs appear. Although the infection usually runs its course in less than a month, it can take animals up to 2 years before they're fully recovered. Vets say there's no effective vaccine. Vaccinated animals can even act as carriers. The justification for slaughtering infected animals is that widespread disease throughout the country would be economically disastrous. Veterinary consultant Dr. Tony Andrews said the British government's slaughter policy had been absolutely necessary to bring the contagious virus under control. He thinks some people have got the wrong idea about foot and mouth. Even if affected meat was entering the food chain, it wouldn't pose any danger to humans if consumed. While humans can contract foot and mouth disease, no one was infected during the outbreak. During the 1967 outbreak, which lasted several months and involved large numbers of workers, vets and farmers being exposed to the disease, only one person was infected. At the height of the crisis, the Institute for Animal Health at Pilbright in Surrey was on standby to provide the necessary vaccine supplies had the government decided to go ahead. The Institute houses an international vaccine bank with 500,000 doses of each of the 7 strains of foot and mouth disease. But if any animal without the virus was vaccinated and then came into contact with the disease within the next few days, it could still pick up the infection and become a carrier. A gamble the government wasn't prepared to take. Ministry of Agriculture officials argued that Britain would lose its export market for between 3 to 12 months if vaccinations had gone ahead. At farms and gardens across Britain, much of the pressure eased. Claremont Landscape Garden is open to the public, but there were still precautions taken against foot and mouth disease. The gardens date from the reign of Queen Anne, but are now managed by the National Trust. The message to overseas tourists was, please do visit this wonderful landscape, as the country folk need your support now more than ever. The National Trust even set up a website, updated daily, to let everyone know which of the properties had been reopened to the public. Down the road from Claremont Garden, Cobham's Painshill Gardens are open to the public all the year round. There's the obligatory Gothic ruin and a pheasant pecking in the hedgerow. Not much has changed here in over 300 years. Places like Painshill are safe for people to walk in, as they don't have footpaths that cross farmland. Perhaps it isn't possible to walk all the way around Britain's famous parks and gardens, but they're still well worth the visit. The top government ministers arrived at 10 Downing Street to hear Prime Minister Tony Blair say that the number of daily cases of foot and mouth had fallen and that it was the time to recover. Prime Minister Blair, who was joined by Britain's Chief Scientific Advisor Professor David King and Agriculture Minister Nick Brown, praised everyone involved in fighting the disease.
We will not slacken our guard against foot and mouth. The risk remains of cases arising.
To get the cooperation.
The crisis was over, the history page written.
Maintenance of biosecurity measures, which MAF have been pressing for all this time.
Nestling into the Dorset countryside, Poundbury is the latest project to challenge the current conventions of architecture and planning. It's an urban development respecting the traditions of the past, whilst also looking forward to the requirements of the 21st century. The development is built on duchy land. As Duke of Cornwall, the Prince of Wales, who's well known for his views on planning and architecture, took the opportunity to put to practice the principles of urban design set out in his book, A Vision of Britain. But it's not just about architecture. The emphasis is on quality design and materials, landscaping and attention to details, even down to street furniture and signs. The aim is building a sense of community where the positioning of buildings is determined by the topography of the site. Cars are parked at the back, out of the way, making it safe for children. The design of each house is different. Much of the housing is situated in mews, lanes, squares and courtyards that relate contextually to its natural environment and creates a series of interesting spaces. There are no overhead wires and street lighting is suspended from elegant wall brackets. Roads tend to be irregular in width and angle, controlling the speed of vehicles without recourse to humps or traffic signs. The car parks are neat gravel courtyards at the rear of the houses. You won't see a satellite dish on the front of a Poundbury home. One of the architects involved explained the ethos behind the design, saying it's not meant to be striking. It's meant to be an ordinary place for people to live in, but somewhere where there's delight in walking around. It's not startling, it's just ordinary, everyday architecture. Unlike the conformity of most modern housing estates, each house is different and they're clustered in groups of 5 or 6. It's a curious example of innovation being based on tradition. The visual focus of Poundbury is the Brownswood Market Hall. Designed by John Simpson, it has an open column ground floor which is used for an organic farmer's market and a single large hall above for community events. The Bathstone columns that hold it up are a massive 4 feet wide at the base. Over the next 20 years, Poundbury is planned to have 2,000 to 3,000 homes spread over 400 acres, incorporating offices, workshops, a community centre, market square and children's playground. Instead of segregating uses, different types of property are mixed. Private and social housing are intermingled and built to the same quality and design. It's a winning formula in that the houses themselves demonstrate old-style quality with a modern quality inside. Poundbury hopes to prove that it's possible to build in a way that can enhance rather than detract from the surrounding countryside by using sympathetic design and architecture. In contrast to Poundbury, in a remote corner of rural England, a dramatic space-age structure has come alive. The Eden project is the world's largest greenhouse, but a greenhouse without glass. It's a sequence of giant intersecting domes perched on and wrapping round the rocky terrain. 3 of the world's climate zones, or biomes, are reproduced under these domes: the humid tropics, rainforests and oceanic islands, the warm temperate regions, the Mediterranean, South Africa and California, and the roofless biome, the temperate zone of Cornwall. The site has been likened to a James Bond movie set, with huge domes bulging from a hole in the ground. It stands on the site of an old China clay pit. It opened to the public on March the 17th, 2001. The whole site was a considerable architectural challenge. When they bought the pit, it was still actually working as a China clay quarry, so the architects were designing on a moving target. Hence the geodesic nature of the structures, incredibly strong, incredibly lightweight. The roofing material is not glass, but foil material, which, unlike glass, lets in ultraviolet, which is good news if you're a plant. The lightweight construction technique, the geodesic dome and the sheer size of the buildings have already turned the Eden project into an architectural icon. Experts are convinced that it will be as famous in its day as the Eiffel Tower or the Sydney Opera House. Eden's domes are glazed with feather-light inflated pillows of a wonder material known as ethylene tetrafluoroethylene foil, in more familiar terms, cling film. The visitor centre and the gateway to Eden are designed to evoke the atmosphere of a journey. The walls are constructed by the traditional so-called rammed earth technique. Visitors will be able to walk for 10 kilometres through tropical rainforests and warm temperate climes with the same temperatures and humidity as the real thing. There are some 200,000 trees and up to 4,000 different species and varieties of flowers and vegetables. Strolling round this newly created rainforest, it's hard to believe that elsewhere in the world a rainforest of the same size is being destroyed every day. For the moment, though, it's enough to enjoy a new Xanadu in deepest Cornwall. That brings us to the end of this edition. We look forward to your company next time when we'll take another look at what's making history.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. On the move.